Greetings and a warm welcome to you all. My name is Professor Anne Karagosian, and it is my pleasure and privilege as the director of the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA to welcome you to our first joint lecture event of the 2021-22 academic year with the Promise Institute for Human Rights at the UCLA Law School. The lecture will be delivered today by Dr. Ümit Kurt of the Polonsky Academy in the Leer Jerusalem Institute and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem on the subject of his recent book, The Armenians of Aintab, The Economics of Genocide in an Ottoman Province, published by Harvard University Press. This talk will explore the processes and documentation of the economic destruction beyond the extraordinary loss of life that was directed at the Armenian population of Aintab during the Armenian Genocide of the early 20th century. Following Dr. Kurt's presentation, we are delighted to invite Mr. Robert Kurkjian, a member of the local Armenian American community and a descendant of genocide survivors from Aintab, to provide additional commentary about his own family's experience with property loss and confiscation. We are grateful to both Dr. Kurt and Mr. Kurkjian for agreeing to speak to us today. For today's lecture, I'm grateful to note that in addition to the co-hosting by the Promise Institute for Human Rights, our event is also co-sponsored by the UCLA Center for Near Eastern Studies, the UCLA Richard Hovhannissian Endowed Chair in Modern Armenian History, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, and the Ararat Eskidjian Museum. Our colleague from the Promise Institute for Human Rights, Kate McIntosh, will provide a formal introduction for our speaker in a moment. But let me note that for those of you watching live via the Zoom webinar platform, you have an opportunity to send questions to us by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom portion of your screen and typing in the question. Please be sure to be as specific and succinct as possible in your question, and we will direct as many of the questions as are practical to our speakers when they are finished. We anticipate that Dr. Kurt's lecture itself will take around 45 to 50 minutes, after which Mr. Kurkjian will speak for a few minutes, and then we will begin the Q&A session. Also, please note that this event is being recorded for future viewing at our Promise Armenian Institute website and YouTube channel. And in the unlikely event that this Zoom webinar drops for any reason, please just connect right back to the same link, as it will put you back into our Zoom session. And now it gives me great pleasure to turn the webinar over to Kate McIntosh, the inaugural executive director of the Promise Institute for Human Rights at the UCLA Law School, which was established in 2017. Ms. McIntosh has worked for over 2 decades in the fields of human rights, international criminal justice, and the protection of civilians. She was involved in the development of international criminal law in its fledgling years and has since contributed to defining many elements of this new area of law. Before coming to UCLA, Kate held multiple roles at international criminal tribunals, including the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia's court operations. She also has extensive experience working with Doctors Without Borders, as well as in post-conflict human rights field operations in Rwanda and Bosnia. So Kate, I'll now turn the webinar over to you for an introduction of Dr. Kurt.
Thank you so much, Anne, and on behalf of the Promise Institute for Human Rights, welcome everybody. So Dr. Ümit Kurt is a historian of the late Ottoman Empire with a particular focus on the transformations of the imperial structures and their role in constituting the republican regime. His research and teaching are grounded on theories of state and class, social identity, and ethnicity. Dr. Kurt received his MA from Sabancı University in 2008 and PhD from Clark University in 2016. Since then, he's held a number of postdoctoral positions in the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University and the Armenian Studies program at California State University in Fresno. As we heard, he's currently research fellow at the Polonsky Academy in the Leer Jerusalem Institute and teaches in the Department of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Dr. Kurt is the author of Antep 1915, Genocide and Perpetrators, co-author of The Spirit of the Laws, The Plunder of Wealth in the Armenian Genocide, and editor of Armenians and Kurds in Late Ottoman Empire, published in 2020. His recent book, The Armenians of Aintab, The Economics of Genocide in an Ottoman Province, is published in April 2021 by Harvard University Press. Ümit Kurt is the winner of the 2021 Discovery Early Career Research Award, given by Australian Research Council, and he's also the Vice Executive Secretary of the International Network of Genocide Scholars. He's recently received the Armenian Research Excellency Award of Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, and we are absolutely privileged and delighted to have him with us today.
Thank you so much for such a generous introduction. I just want to make a very small correction about my short bio with the very last one. I haven't received the Armenian Research Excellency Award from Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation because that kind of award doesn't exist, but I received a generous research support from such kind of prestigious and great institution. I just want to make this correction for the time being. And thank you so much for organizing this important event. And thank you so much all the sponsors Professor Kurkjian has mentioned. And let me share my screen with you because I have a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, perfect. So I want to start actually with the story. What was the story behind writing this book and doing this research, which took me around 8 to 9 years, and how the idea of writing this book originated. And also it gives you an idea a little bit about the research process and the relevant stories of my discoveries over the course of this process. Following my graduation from the university, I found myself again at my parents' house in my hometown of Gaziantep, formerly known as Aintab, where I escaped the stifling heat and passed the days dozing on the sofa. One day I was jarred from my nap by a call from an old friend. Ümit, where have you been? It has been ages. I know a great place in Kayacik where we can catch up. Though I was born and raised in Aintab, hadn't left the city until college, the word Kayacik itself did not mean anything to me. It was just another district in the city, a neighborhood I had never visited, of which I knew nothing. She said she would wait for me at Papyrus Cafe and gave me directions. I took the bus to the Kayacik neighborhood, and upon arrival found myself dazed by the charming atmosphere, letting myself get lost in the side streets and leaving my poor friend waiting some more. Embarrassed by my obliviousness, I found myself asking, where am I? What is this place? I was on a narrow street with beautifully constructed stone houses lining each side, taking you back to a simpler, although silently mysterious time. Tucked away between the high-rise concrete apartment buildings of so-called modernized Gaziantep, this neighborhood was like an architectural mirage. I felt nostalgic for a past that was never mine. Finally, I found Papyrus Cafe, which turned out to be located in one of those exotic houses. Like most of the houses on the street, it had been converted into a coffee shop as part of the process of restoring the city. Upon entering, a few letters carved at the top of this majestic gate. It caught my eye immediately. Not recognizing the script, I simply assumed these were Ottoman characters. Inside, I was once more left speechless. A spacious courtyard with staircases on either side leading up to the two large rooms welcomed me. The rooms were filled with antique furnishings, and the high ceilings were adorned with frescoes and engravings similar to Florentine cathedrals. The experience was kind of a historical voyeurism, like stepping into a living museum. Feeling a surge of pride in my hometown and ancestors, I decided to talk to the owner to try to glean some information about the history of the house. I approached him, intending only to compliment his establishment, but before I could stop myself, I asked, I was just wondering, from whom did you get this place? Who was here before you? He wearily explained that he inherited this place from his grandfather. It must have been especially strong coffee they were serving that day, as I was emboldened to press further. And how about your grandfather? From whom did he buy this place? The man paused hesitantly before responding. And then after a few moments, he softly murmured to the ground beneath him, there were Armenians here. I said, what Armenians? What are you talking about? Were there Armenians in Gaziantep? He nodded. I was getting annoyed with the opacity of his answers. So what happened to them? Where did they go? He retorted indifferently. They left. As I rode the bus back home, I pondered why the Armenians, why anyone would just leave and hand over such an exquisite property to someone. I was a naive to the point of ignorant 23-year-old university graduate, unaware of the existence of Armenians in my hometown. And a few years later, I would find out that the house belonged to Nazar Nazaretian, honorary consulate to Iran, who was a member of the Aintab's wealthiest and the most prominent family. And he, his children, and his grandchildren used to live in this house, as you see in the cover of this, in this image as the cover of my book. Those letters above the gates were not Ottoman, but Armenian, spelling out the name of Karanazar, Nazar. He built the house. Years later, I would also have the chance to meet the youngest member of the family, Shushan, whose grandmother was deported at the age of 1 during the 1915 Armenian Genocide. Shushan kindly spoke the Turkish to me in Aintab dialect. Hence, that building is no longer a populist cafe for me. For me, it's the house of Karanazar, the Nazaretians' home, the house where the grandmother of dear Shushan was born. In Turkish, there is saying, mal sahibi, mülk sahibi, hani bunun ilk sahibi. Roughly translated, it reads, landlord, property owner, where is the original owner? So this is the story about how the idea to work on the topic and write a book out of it came out. This book is the story of the Aintab Armenians who were torn away from their homes, neighborhoods, and the city where they were born and raised. This is the account of how their material and spatial wealth changed hands and was transformed. This is the historical record of their persecution and subsequent erasure. So I would like to point out a couple of general remarks about the book, like the gist of the book. So my book basically digs into details of the Armenian dispossession that produced the homogeneous Turkish city in which I grew up. In particular, I examined the population that gained from ethnic cleansing. Records of land confiscation and population transfer demonstrate just how much the new wealth became available when the prosperous Armenians who were active in manufacturing, agriculture, production, and trade were ejected. Although the official rationale for the removal of the Armenians was that the group posed a threat of rebellion, I showed that the prospect of material gain was a key motivator of support for the Armenian genocide among the local Muslim gentry and the Turkish public. Those who benefited most, provincial elites, wealthy landowners, state officials, and merchants who accumulated Armenian capital, in turn financed the nationalist movement that brought the modern Turkish Republic into being. The economic elite of Aintab was thus reconstituted along both ethnic and political lines. So the Ottoman Empire's participation in World War I included a major campaign aimed at eliminating certain minorities, first and foremost Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, and so forth. This process was depicted by the CEP regime and the unity of the Committee of Union and Progress, the ruling Ottoman government then, and Muslim society as dangerous and treacherous domestic enemies. This campaign led Armenians to be subjected to wartime mass deportation, internment, total extermination, and expropriation. However, the Ottoman Empire was by no means the only state to take measures against its citizens. Both Central and Allied powers carried out brutal policies against domestic political suspects and enemy aliens during the years 1914-1918. For example, as Eric Lohr pointed out, the Russians' campaign against its enemy citizens quickly widened in scope to include the empire's largest population of ethnic Germans to Russian subject Jews, Muslim, and others. Only in one state, according to historian Matthew Stipp and Ellen Kramer, the Ottoman Empire, did this dynamic of destruction get pushed as far as genocide. In others, including Austria-Hungary, the quest for military security had numerous murderous rather than genocidal consequences. So pursuing this global dynamic of violence during the Great War, the CUP campaign resulted in forced displacement of more than 1 million civilians, the nationalization of a substantial portion of the imperial economy, and transfer of extensive lands, assets, and properties from the targeted minorities to favored groups. So what we see actually, this global dynamic, this pattern of violence, which also enables us to explore and analyze destruction of Armenians within a larger framework. So the sheer scale of actions constituting genocide could not be carried out by a single order from the central government. Therefore, local dynamics play an extremely important role in this destruction. I investigate in this book local and regional dynamics with a particular emphasis on the disintegration of social relations, the breakdown of social fabric in the city of Aintab, to contextualize the developments that led to persecution, forced deportation, and mass murder of Armenians and the dispossession of their property. As Hilmar Kaiser and Ümit Kurt successfully did in the case of Diyarbakir, I pay particular attention to the local dynamics of genocide, its political, social, and economic legacies, and the roles of local actors and civilian and military authorities. But my book distinguished itself from those scholars' valuable work by combining Armenian and Turkish documentation, as well as employing unmined Armenian and Turkish sources, as well as other archival materials in foreign languages. Doing so enables me to demonstrate the complex picture of not only the relations between central and local actors, but also each group's internal relations. Thus, the book brings together analysis at the micro level, contextualizing the genocide in a global and national context, the meso level, revealing and discussing the activities of the various middlemen of violence, notables, mid-ranking officers, and the tribal leaders, and finally, the micro level, dissecting how the process unfolded in various regional microcosms, an approach that has been missing in the literature. It also provides new insights on the causes and origins of genocidal policies and their impact in the making and remaking of provincial elites, and by extension of the modern Turkish Republic. Therefore, the scope of the book is not limited to the sale and liquidation of Armenian properties. It treats confiscation as an all-encompassing displacement process whose political and social underpinnings and historical context must be considered in tandem. At the core of the book is a series of studies of the nationalization of state practices at the local level, the expropriation and liquidation of properties and businesses of Armenians, their forced mass deportation, and extermination. So my book focuses on the origins and implementation of these practices in the city of Aintab, basically. So by the way, this guy is Mahmud Dai, who acquired the Nazarian house, this majestic house, which I have shown in the past images. So this is Aintab in late 19th century, bird eye view of Aintab. As you see, it was the majestic, the first Gregorian church, Surp Asvazasi Yeretsi, in the late 19th century, Aintab, again, another panoramic view of the city. First of all, this book offers a fresh take at analyzing the murder and plunder of the Armenians of Aintab. So it portrays the socioeconomic and political undercuts, which reinforce the foundations of a genocide in the making. So it provides a historical analysis of the local dynamics while paying attention to the political, ideological, political, social, and economic climate in the city, a crucially important town in the district of the time, located in the southeastern Anatolia, also referred to as Cilicia. By combining socio-political and socio-economic historical methods, this book treats Aintab as a microcosm to elucidate the confiscation and transfer of Armenian properties. It shows that this process is an essential component of a genocidal policy and demonstrate how the prospect of material improvements serve as a major incentive for garnering the support and involvement of the Muslim gentry in the Armenian genocide. So it convincingly shows the Armenian genocide and its redistribution of wealth to local Turkish and other Muslim groups help nationalize the economy and create new local elites. So accompanying the massacres, the confiscation and plunder process of Aintab's Armenians can be divided into 3 periods. In the first period, World War I, both the CUP itself as well as Muslim elites and ordinary Muslims pillage Armenian wealth. In terms of the CUP policy regarding the removal of Armenians from the economy, a clear legal framework was required. These laws and statutes came to be known as abandoned properties laws and envali Türkiye kanunları. In the second period, post-World War I, 1918-1921, in the case of Aintab, after the Ottoman defeat, the process of restitution commenced in the city in the first place, but was later discontinued. In the Sykes-Picot Agreement, concluded secretly in May 1916, France and Britain carved the Arab provinces, the territories of the former Ottoman Empire, into spheres of imperial influence. Under Sykes-Picot, the Syrian coast and modern-day Lebanon was annexed by France, and the Britain took direct control of the central and southern Mesopotamian territories. Based on this agreement, the 7th article of the Mondros Armistice from October 13, 1918, British forces occupied Aintab in December 1918. The primary and most urgent task of the British occupation forces were to facilitate the return of Armenians to their homes, to restore their properties and assets, and to find and deliver Armenian women and children who had been held in the Muslim households to their families or relatives. So Armenian survivors start to return to their hometowns in December 1918, most immediately concerned with discerning how their movable and immovable properties will be returned to them. The issue of restitution of properties was of pressing importance for the Ottoman government. Related orders were sent to localities and the necessary legal regulations were actually issued. However, the British decided to cede the city to the French by signing the Syrian agreement with the French government in September 1919. According to this agreement, the French forces would replace the British in October 1919, a situation that disrupted the restoration process. Local authorities became reluctant to return the Armenian properties to the survivors, and even if ordered to do so by the Minister of Interior. Though houses were occasionally returned to their rightful owners, in most cases, local authorities refused to evict the present occupants. Additionally, the rise of the Kemalist national movement in the city in 1919 and 1920 put a halt to the restitution process. So in the face of French occupation, local nationalist Kemalist forces instigated armed struggle against the French. Throughout the Turkish-French War in Aintab, which started on April 1st, 1920, and ended with the Kemalist defeat and the city's surrender to the French military forces on February 9th, 1921, the Armenians of Aintab allied with the French. Yet, despite their victory, the French ultimately decided to retreat from the city in February 1921, leaving it on October 20, 1920 to the Kemalist forces in accordance with the Treaty of Ankara. In the third period, post-1921 period, with the total departure of the Armenians from the city, the confiscation and plunder process was completed. With the new administrative and legal regulations implemented under the domestic laws following the Treaty of Lausanne in 1924, and other bilateral agreements signed between France and Turkey in 1926 and 1932, invalidating the return of properties, all movable and immovable assets of Armenians who were forced to move to Aleppo and Beirut were appropriated. Armenian properties were mainly sold by auction to Aintab's local elites who participated in the Turkish-French War and who supported the national forces financially and logistically. These auctions were organized by Internal Revenue Office, Defterdarlık, of the city, and the local administration's initiative. Economic wealth began to change, hence following the Armenians' deportation. This wealth was liquidated by the commissions, abandoned property and abandoned property liquidation commissions, and was used for various purposes. With the redistribution of Armenian properties, a new wealthy Turkish Muslim elite class emerged in Aintab after 1915. It's possible to divide the emergence of this new class into two periods. The first period took place between 1915 and 1918, when Aintab's new elite or new bourgeoisie was born. The second period was from 1921 to 1922, when this new class social status was consolidated through liquidation of Armenians' wealth and property. Here, I will focus on the first period. In my book, I have also analyzed the three periods as well. So properties belonging to Ottoman Armenians were seized through various law decrees and other legal regulations passed by the CUP government and later the cadres of the Republican regime. Both governments concocted ways of making this illegal process took legitimate under the veil of the law. Central to this process were the economic outcomes of violence committed against the Armenians. Principally, what economic violence refers to here is the appropriation of movable and immovable properties and assets left behind by the deported Armenians, and this process was abetted by the legal system, through which an entire community was reduced to status of non-existence. After the CUP issued deportation orders, Ottoman Armenian citizens were prohibited from selling and renting or transferring their properties. Therefore, the state systematically managed to confiscate these assets, and highly detailed laws were prepared regarding how these properties would be appropriated. This whole process was put into action by commissions established by the CUP government, and these commissions were called Abandoned Properties Commissions and Abandoned Properties Liquidation Commissions. Through laws and regulations issued during this period of CUP government, an intricately detailed action plan was presented regarding what was to be done with the properties left by the Armenians, but no legal arrangements was introduced regarding the values of these properties that were supposed to be returned according to the laws that were installed by this government, official government. So in the book, I try to detail how these regulations were actually and formally not executed, specifically with the Armenians of Aintab in mind, concentrating on the appropriation of Armenian abandoned properties. I investigate what happened to these properties, primarily by using Armenian sources and other archival materials. I present a unique report of the Aintab Liquidation Commission, previously undiscovered, that documents the liquidation process on the ground. It's the first of its kind in demonstrating how numerous government officials and other individuals from different classes, including property assessors, auction houses, trustees, estate agents and notaries, and the transport companies, for instance, were employed to manage the administration and sale of Armenian assets through the abandoned properties law. So I want to start with an anecdote here. In the aftermath of the Aintab War, there was this town crier walking around town and inviting those who had participated in the war to come to the Salt Caravanserai, the Tuzhanı. Many locals of Aintab, including Ali Beshe, a prominent member of the Aintab's gentry and leading figure of the Aintab CUP club, headed over. A guy told them to queue up in the twos, as they would let people in two at a time. It was Ali Beshe's turn. He went in and saw some keys placed on a rock. Each person takes two, commanded the guy in charge. There were also these medallions lying on the rock. Ali Beshe took a quick glance and said, "So that's what we save Aintab for. for 2 keys and a piece of tin. Thanks. And he left. Who would have guessed that those 2 keys belonged to the Armenians? And there were keys to 2 Armenian houses. So what would happen to properties Armenians left behind, and how would they be managed? Beginning in May 1915, a series of laws and decrees and regulations that were known as the abandoned properties laws was introduced to address these questions, with the intention that the state should assume control of these properties and liquidate them based on certain self-serving priorities. Yet, not a single arrangement was enacted to ensure that values equivalent to the seized properties would be provided to the Armenians at their deportation destinations. So, I want to start with the fire sales and profiteering. The first deportees who left Aintab were promised that this was a temporary arrangement and they would return to their homes in a few months. According to some survivor accounts, Armenians were told that they could leave everything, lock their doors, and either hold onto their keys and leave them with a neighbor or a muhtar, a headman. They were also assured that the government would carefully seal their properties and protect them. However, those who received their deportation notice start to put their belongings up for sale at first sale rates. Many Armenian families sought to rent or buy draft animals to be able to endure the long and hard road that lay ahead. Those who bore the heaviest brunt were well-off Armenian families from middle or higher classes, particularly Armenian merchants and tradesmen. After the deportation decision became definitive, they want to convert as many of their assets as possible to currency. Thus, they put everything they own on the market. Some trusted their Muslim neighbors with their valuables and other properties, hoping that they would eventually be able to reclaim them upon their return. For Muslims, this was a lifetime opportunity to seize the spoils. Kayacik and the other Armenian neighborhoods surrounding the city were transformed into a huge open bazaar in early August 1915. Hundreds of thousands of gold coins were sold for a fraction of their worth. Everything movable was displayed in the streets, and Muslims began to purchase these items for as cheap as dirt. Massive amounts of bedding, furniture, and utensils were piled up in the Armenian quarter and sold at auction, seldom bringing more than 1/5 of their value and often far less than that. Buyers determined the prices. On the one hand, there were those who offered, if you don't want to leave these behind, here is the price. On the other hand, there were those who tried to deceive Armenians, saying, let's put this stuff in my storeroom. It's yours when you return. Do not sell them in the auction. In his report sent to Henry Morgenthau, the US ambassador to Istanbul, on August 19, 1915, Aleppo consul Jesse Jackson describes the extent of this profiteering. Quote, the Armenian community of Aintab was the wealthiest of the kind in this part of the empire, offering a splendid opportunity for pillage. Their household belongings were left behind to be taken by the first plunderer to arrive. Most of the merchants of the city being Armenians, their stocks likewise disappeared. It was a gigantic plundering scheme as well as final blow to extinguishing the race, unquote. So the Ottoman government was aware of the fact that people were buying the abandoned properties at extremely low prices and then selling them at higher rates. Considering this chaotic situation against the state's own interest, it attempted to manage the process more systematically so that the state could reap the greatest profits. Furthermore, disorderly plunder would not promote the development of Muslim businesses, but rather serve to enrich some at the expense of others. Therefore, the CUP government warned various provinces and districts, including Aintab, over such abuses and ordered the prevention of illegal exploitation. All transactions conducted at extremely low rates, auctions for depreciating goods, protection of goods on behalf of their owners, and procedures such as conveyance and sequestration of real estate were prohibited. In fact, the street crier went from door to door, accompanied by 2 policemen, to guarantee people that anyone who sells or buys anything, if caught, will be sent to the court-martial and the goods will be confiscated. In doing so, the government intends to acquire for itself all the remaining property of the Armenians. Despite these measures, fire sales carried on for months, and movable assets could be sold for 20% of their real value. This process was one of the reasons for Armenian destitution and starvation in the deportation roads. So, as for the landed properties of Armenians, I can give you some numbers. There were 6,000 residential homes and 7,000 parcels of land that belong to Aintab Armenians, approximately, roughly. It's possible to divide seized landed properties into 4 categories: the major immovable properties of the wealthy families, middle or second-class immovable assets, public properties, and national properties or properties owned by religious institutions. So, of course, there was the active participation of local elites in the process of plunder. Motivated by the promise of acquiring movable and immovable Armenian properties, local elites meticulously carried out orders sent by the unionists from the central government. To ensure the so-called success of Armenian destruction, an executive committee was established with the encouragement of the district governor Ahmet Faik Bey and the CUP deputy, well-known local elite Ali Cenani. Its members included local notables, local CUP members, and civil and military officers. These members were the son of Debbag Kimyazadeh, who was a local merchant, and well-known provincial elite Kadir Bey, the prison warden Zeki, the son of Gendarmerie Commander Hacı Halil, Seyyafzade Abdo Efendi, Hacı Halil Azade Zeki Bey, Tahcizade Abdullah, Mennanzade Mustafa Bey, Ulema Bülbül Hoca, and so forth. The committee selected 4 representatives and sent them to Derzor to see the actual living conditions of Aintab Armenians firsthand and ensure that the circumstances render it impossible for them to return to Aintab. Having done so, they could seize Armenian properties without any reserve. These 4 representatives were the son of Debbag Kimyazadeh Kadir, the son of Nuri Bey, the son-in-law of Seyyafzadeh and Zeki, and the son of Hacı Halil. After confirming the dire situation of Aintab Armenians in Derzor, committee members freely participated in auctions organized by the liquidation commissions. As they were close with Tevfik Bey, the president of Aintab Liquidation Commission, they were able to purchase valuable Armenian items at very low prices. So Ali Cenani, for instance, one of those notables, conceded the fact that most of the wealth of Armenians left their many and valuable items with the Ottoman branch of Ottoman Bank in Aintab right before their deportation. He claimed that former district governor Mehmet Şükrü Bey issued an order warning the Armenians and helped them to deposit their goods and belongings in the charge of the Ottoman Bank. For that purpose, he rented Nazarian Han and deposited all the Armenian goods therein. Later on, the Minister of Interior, after having corresponded with the bank, gave an order that a commission should be formed with the right to sell these goods. So Ottoman Bank's employees also tried to persuade Armenians to entrust their valuables to the bank, assuring them that after the sale, money will be sent to actual owners. However, when Aintab Armenians who were to be deported and sent letters to Ottoman Bank asking for money, the bank did not heed these requests. The Leon Rahern, the manager of the bank's Aintab branch, played a significant role in the confiscation of Armenian properties. He attended meetings organized by Muslim notables and encouraged them to expropriate Armenian properties by deception. Prior to deportation, Armenians were required to submit a petition to register their movable and immovable properties. An instruction was in effect stating that these petitions had to be delivered to Aintab Liquidation Commission within a day of receiving notice for deportation. Accordingly, in early December 1915, Armenians, mostly Protestants, who were in preparation to leave Aintab, submitted their petitions to have their houses registered by the Liquidation Commission. At the same time, the commission had already begun sales of Armenian movable goods and assets by auction. For instance, on 23rd of January 1916, houses of bakers, jewelers, shop owners, edge tool makers, and other artisans were registered by the liquidation commission so that the owners could be deported to Diyarbakir, Urfa, Sivas, and Adıyaman. On March 6th of the same year, liquidation commission started to sell the goods and other objects preserved in the Surp Asvazatsin church by auction. Armenian properties were also used for various purposes and distributed for the purpose of meeting military and governmental needs, for meeting the needs of refugees and immigrants in the town, and also for other purposes. For instance, Armenian properties were utilized for the purpose of facilitating the settlement of Muslim refugees and immigrants in Aintab. By late September 1915, Muslim refugees were being settled in Armenian houses. On October 25th, a letter was sent to the liquidation commissions stating that immigrants who had been sent to the resettlement area should be placed in vacated homes and all their needs should be addressed. They also acquired shops and businesses so-called abandoned by Armenians. For instance, Yervan Kurkjian, a genocide survivor from the town, describes how an Armenian house was given to the refugees settled in Aintab. Quote, after the Dalians were exiled, another tenant came. He came in with a goat and directly tied it to the room with red marble floors. One thing I remember was that the new tenant was a Turkish family. So in the book, I document how the auction processes were really carried out by focusing on the fate of the three families. For the sake of this presentation, I'm going to focus on how the properties, belongings of Sarkis Yakupian were so-called legally liquidated by Aintab Liquidation Commission as a result of an auction. So basically, I will examine how Armenian properties were plundered and liquidated by focusing on the personal history of an Aintab Armenian family, the Yakupians, which shed light on how thousands of Armenian families lost their wealth. Two documents provided by Sarkis Yakupian family offer a previously undiscovered aspect of liquidation process in Aintab. Yakupian's lists are of great significance as they hint at what information on liquidated Armenian movable and immovable properties in the Ottoman archives might conceal. Sarkis Yakupian was deported to Hama in December 1915. He died in Aleppo in 1922. I acquired these reports of liquidation commission from his grandchildren living in Los Angeles. Liquidation commissions were founded in the 35 provinces and districts in Anatolia, including Aleppo and Aintab. Liquidation commission made a list of liquidated properties of the deportee. One of the copy of this list or record was supposed to have given to the deportee. Other copies and sale records were written in notebooks, hesap defterleri. Those notebooks had two copies. One was kept by the president of the liquidation commission, and other copy was responsible secretary of the CUP. So we know for good that these records do exist, but inaccessible in the archives. Over the course of my 1.5 years research in Ottoman Prime Ministerial archives, all my requests to see these records were denied or turned away. So first Yakupian document includes a list of the family's properties registered by the Ottoman Bank in order to be submitted to the Aintab Liquidation Commission immediately following the family's deportation. The second document consists of another list, which indicates the commission's auction results, along with detailed information on buyers and the prices of these assets. So this record is an original document of the official transaction, revealing for the first time the processes of liquidation and auction executed by the Aintab Liquidation Commission. So the properties listed in the Yakupian's documents were registered at the Ottoman Bank on behalf of Sarkis Yakupian and his family on October 19th, 1950. The bank surrendered these properties to the Aintab Liquidation Commission on May 13, 1950. Soon after, on June 1st, the commission auctioned these properties. The list, dated May 13, 1916, includes the number and type of the movable goods and items, as well as real estate, whereas the list dated June 1st offers the details of who purchased these assets and at what price. As can be seen in the table, most of the Yakupians' possessions consisted of household goods, and most of the buyers were members of the Aintab's CUP, basically provincial elites, and civil and military officers, local state officials. Among the household items, the majority came from the kitchen, bathroom, and salon. From the kitchen, pots, soup bowls, plates, sets of cutlery, and even a yogurt container were sold. From the bathroom, multiple basins, a laundry boiler, and a bath vessel were sold. Ahmet Ağa, in particular, took advantage, purchasing more items than any other buyer. A total of 7 rugs were sold, with one fetching 1,400 piasters or kurush from Demir Muhsin, for instance. Beyond the household goods, a number of valuable items were included for sale. There were a few pieces of silver, most were of gold, 4 gold bracelets and 1 gold watch band, 10 gold rings, 2 gold earrings. Additionally, a handful of other assorted items were listed, such as 1 steelyard, 1 child's pillow, and 5 trade notebooks. Many of the landed properties lost had been in the Yakupians family for roughly 5 to 10 years. Upon close examination, the list of buyers, including various family names from Aramandonyan's perpetrator list as well. For example, although his participation in the auction was prohibited, Tevfik Efendi, chairman of Aintab Liquidation Commission, was one of the buyers. Among the other buyers were Dayizade Ahmet Hurşit Bey. You can see him on the very left, next to the guy with holding his stick. Second on the left row, I mean. Hacı Halil Efendi, Mennanzade Mustafa, president of the CP club at the time, Halilzade Ahmet, all permanent members of the Aintab CP branch who play active roles in deportations. Besides these figures, additional buyers of the Yakupians' properties can be found in the perpetrator list provided by Aramandonyan, as I have just said. So these documents methodically demonstrate that local actors assume direct roles in the deportation and destruction of Armenians in the city. They were motivated by material gain from liquidated Armenian properties and benefited from a legalized regime of plunder. The Yakupian documents indicate how meticulously organized the looting was and offer a glimpse of the similar documents locked in the Ottoman archives. As can be from the Yakupians' case, numerous government officials and other individuals, estate agents, trustees, auction houses, property assessors, were employed to manage this process. In most areas, the CUP relied to a considerable extent on the cooperation of local administration, institutions, and state officials, as well as provincial elite and ordinary citizens. So the deportation and destruction of Aintab Armenians were not implemented by a rebel brought in from the countryside to carry out an act recognized as too despicable for respectable people, nor performed by Aintab's more ordinary have-nots, but rather were brought about by the district's Muslim notables, landowners, dignitaries, and the city's elites. They prospered through acquisition of Armenian property and wealth, elevating them into an even more privileged position. This process of redistributing Armenian properties illustrates the close relationship between the CUP officials and the local Muslim elites. So, to sum up, this new rich of Gaziantep were not only influential figures in the national resistance and the Republican period, but they also emerge as the new captains of industry in the city. So the economic elite of Aintab was being reconstituted along political lines. A new political class based on such qualifications as previous CUP service, zeal in the Turkish-French War, and political reliability as Republicans, was able through its acquisition of Armenian belt to lay the economic foundations that would sustain its status over generations, long after World War I, and its aftermath was only a memory. So, as a native son of Gaziantep myself, actually, I know I now fully realize that through having attended the same school with grandsons and granddaughters of those elites in the image, as you can see, I myself have witnessed the consequences of Aintab Armenians' physical and material destruction. Therefore, I mean, my account here, of course, can offer insight into local history, but is only a small step in understanding the complete picture of not only what happened, but also how and why these events transpired. Unseen in the archive letters, telegrams, and property leaks are the trauma and suffering of Armenian survivors, repeatedly subjected to attacks on their lives, culture, assets, and social status. So the base motives for their former neighbors therefore left some of the most indelible wounds, which more than a century later remain unhealed. So thank you so much for your patience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your fascinating presentation, Ümit, especially for your extraordinary level of detailed documentation on the losses incurred by the Armenian population of Aintab well over 100 years ago. One of the families that Ümit has referenced in his book is the Danielian Barsumian family, whose losses are discussed also in some detail. Esther Danielian Barsumian was the maternal grandmother of our discussant for this lecture, Mr. Robert Kurkjian of Los Angeles. And we are pleased to welcome him to this forum to provide a personal connection as well as an update to Dr. Kurt's important historical research. Mr. Kurkjian actually has Aintab roots from both his mother's and his father's side of the family, as we will hear. Bob Kurkjian is a retired engineering director from the Hughes Research Laboratories, or HRL, in Malibu, California, supporting research projects for both General Motors and Boeing. Mr. Kurkjian received his BS in electrical engineering from MIT in 1962 and his MS in electrical engineering from USC in 1964. Since his retirement from HRL, Mr. Kurkjian has continued his family's interest in quality education as a member of the Gaziantep University Board of Trustees and as a member of the Board of Directors of the Harrison Trust, supporting Los Angeles high school students. In 2000, he joined his brother and sister-in-law, Louis and Grace Kurkjian, in actually visiting Aintab and environs to see where their grandparents' families resided before 1915. So Bob, I'll now turn this over to you, and you can now share your slides and chat with us.
I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, you might want to go back to the beginning.
Yes, I will do that. So thank you very much, Anne, and thanks to Ümit. His books filled in much of the history that my grandparents had to go through, and I didn't know much of that. It's such a detailed rendition of what they suffered and how they survived. So I'm really pleased to be part of this. In 2000, we went to Gaziantep, Aintab to me, and this is a little bit that takes off of what Ümit had talked about. I got help from my brother. He did the family tree. He has 4,000 relatives identified from the Kurkjian, Babikian, Danelian, and Barsumian families, all Eintopsi. So, and then my cousins, Richard and Suzanne Kurkjian and Jakob, gave us the deeds, or loaned us the deeds of the Kurkjian side of the family, which I'll talk about. This was covered in the book, and Anne mentioned it. This is the Barsumian family, George Barsumian and Yester Danelian Barsumian. And these were the properties that were confiscated by them. And Ümit shows these in his book. The estimated value was done by my Aunt Virginia, or pardon me, by my grandmother, Esther Barsumian, when she in 1933 sued the Turkish government and went through a lawyer in Fresno and got nothing for it. And this was modest. They were not a wealthy family. Probably the Danelian side of the family was more wealthy than the Barsumian side. My grandfather George did rug cleaning. He invented a very good red dye. My mother is the infant there, and my uncle George Barsumian is there in the front. There were 5 living children total. When Ümit's book came out, I met Ümit in 2013 at the Eskijin Ararat Museum. He gave a talk then about what he was starting to do in 2013. And so we gave him some information about the Barsumian properties. I didn't realize at that time that the Kurkjian side, while I knew the Kurkjian side was more wealthier, I didn't have the level of detail then. This is the Kurkjian family, and Sultan Hana had the deeds to all the property. She kept a tight hold on them. Wherever she traveled, they were in her purse and they didn't leave her. And when she came to the States, she lived in Aleppo after leaving Aintab. Habib died sometime around 2014, 2015, a date uncertain right now. Uncle Albert there in the front, he came to the States, and my father followed when he was 16, although he told the people at Ellis Island he was 18, he got in. So when I read his book recently, it got me all charged up to go and look at those deeds. And Richard Kurkjian, Albert's son, had sent me and Louis the pile of deeds. They were about that tall to copy. And with seeing Ümit's book, I got interested and found in there a list of their properties. And this is a big list. A lot of orchards, pistachio groves, the Kurkjian family exported pistachio nuts to the States. A number of homes, the mansions where the family lived had marble floors and supposedly had the first bathtub Aintab. I don't know if that's true or not. But you can see they had summer homes, they had rental homes, they had stores. The main thing of interest to me was they had furs and hides. Kurkjian means a furrier, a fur trader. So here was documentation, 5,000 pieces of furs. And they were stored at something called the Kurkjian. Kurkjian is the Kurkjian Inn, and it's a place where on the Silk Road, you would bring your camels, put them in the courtyard, and then upstairs you would stay, and the next day you would move on. So this was considered a cultural part of Turkey and has been preserved and is still there and actually renovated, which I'll talk about in a moment or two. We went, as Anne said, we went to Aintab. Louis and Grace, my brother and his wife, and I went to Gaziantep on an Armenian trip. And Grace's father came from Kilis, and Louis's father came from Aintab, and the two got together, and we were at this fork in the roads and took this great picture. As part of what we tried to see where we lived. Had we really looked at the material we had before we went, we would have found the intersections of where these homes were. We got to the general district, and we may have gotten close to the homes, but we're not sure. The first church, the first Protestant church, was started by the Kurkjian family, and then the Kurkjian. We were very lucky to go to the American hospital on the hill overlooking Aintab, where the shepherd of Aintab, Dr. Frederick Shepherd, he was the director. And we owe a lot to the missionaries and the people of New England, United States. They sent people over there to start churches, to start schools. And this family, the Shepherd family, it's Dr. Shepherd, his son, and his grandson, who all were a director of that hospital in Aintab. And we met him by chance on that day in 2000. That's Dr. Shepherd on the left there. And of course, if you go to Aintab, every other store sells baklava and dondurma. And dondurma, for people who don't understand Turkish or Armenian, is ice cream, a special type of ice cream. As I mentioned, the Kurkjian was kind of interesting because everything that we saw that the Kurkjians owned was, a lot of stuff was stored there. And this was confiscated. What you see on the left is the facade of the entrance, and these black and white stones are a key Armenian architecture item. The keystone is in the right, and it says the date when it was built, which is 1890. Hagop Kurkjian, fourth generation back, a great grand uncle of mine, would have been, probably was the builder of it. Generally in Aintab, all references to Armenians were erased. This was not, and there were other ones. Ümit showed you a picture of a stone at the coffee shop. That was in Armenian characters, and this is in Armenian characters. So it was kind of interesting. But to get a picture, my brother had to go find a ladder, climb on another building, get on the roof, and then do his telephoto lens and shoot this. So I thank God he did it. Now we have a picture to show. Down below is the three of us with two of the people who worked at the inn, and we told them we were, previous owners or relatives of previous owners. They were very nice. They showed us around. We went inside. They called the owner. He said, come back the next day. I'll greet you. We came the next day. He got fruit, dates, tea, coffee, and we sat and had a nice chat. Notice the key that Ümit mentioned about the keys to the property. That's the key to this property that probably someone got in the 2020, the 1921 timeframe. The father of the owner that we met was the one who got the title for this, the Kurkjian, and he got that after World War II. This is a picture showing the interior. First floor camels, second floor people. While we were there, the owner brought out a little model. He wanted to renovate the Kurkjian and make it into what I would consider a Marriott courtyard. I don't know, it has been renovated since we were there. I don't know to what degree. If you go on YouTube and put in Gaziantep and Kurkjian, you will get, there's a video of the current Kurkjian Inn, and you can see it. So when I go back there, maybe I'll be staying at a Marriott Courtyard Gaziantep. We'll see. I heartily recommend that anyone of Aintab's origin reads Ümit's book. You will, it's so well footnoted and documented. You'll find Armenian names. One of them is going to be a relative. The Barsumians, the Danelians, the Kurkjians are all mentioned in his book in various places. My grandfather, Barsumian Kurkjian, he was in the underground. He got arrested. He was going to be executed. The mayor of the city said, no, that Barsumian is okay. And they did a change of venue and they moved the prisoners to Aleppo. And Aleppo people were not that anxious to execute them. So he got, he was innocent and he came back. So, but then he said, you know, unto us a sign is given, probably. So he left and came to the United States in 1920, 1911 time frame, 1910 time frame. His wife and the 3 kids at the time, actually the 4th before time went on, came over 2 years later. My grandfather worked hard, saved money, sent it back to make the arrangements for them to come. And over his time here, he brought 17 members of the family over from Aintab and that area to the United States. They were all wealthy at one point or doing well. They lost everything, and yet they came to the United States, and most of the Armenians that arrived have been successful. They're entrepreneurial. They were well brought up by their parents, and so I'm really proud of what the family has done. I encourage all of you to read this book and enjoy it. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to you, Bob, and especially to Ümit for your fascinating lecture and discussion. Let me note, as if most of our audience may not be aware of the fact that California, of course, has a huge Armenian American population and also has a sizable Aintabtsi Armenian population. The community is very well organized, and so we are glad to have one of their members speak to us today. So thank you, Bob. So now we are going to turn to a few of the questions from our audience that we've received via the Q&A function. Once again, please pose your questions in a clear and succinct manner, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Before we do, though, let me just ask Ümit a very quick question. You have documented in extraordinary detail from primary sources, largely, the confiscation and disposition of the properties of the Armenians of Aintab. Could you talk about other studies that have been done or are ongoing of a similar nature for other parts of the Ottoman Empire and the theft of Armenian properties therein?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for this. It's a very important question. Unfortunately, to this date, we haven't had a great number of studies, especially with regard to this particular aspect, this economic violence dimension of the Armenian genocide or destruction of Armenians. That's why my work it's first of its kind. To document in the first place and historically analyze how the liquidation process as a bureaucratically sanctioned transaction of an official modern state was carried out on the ground. Because as we know, important scholars have done also remarkable, works regarding how the Armenian wealth was plundered, looted, but to demonstrate how it was so-called, it was done under the veneer of legality, has not been, this kind of work has not been done yet. But my book and my work actually is filling this, let's say, lacuna in the literature.
Thank you so much, Ümit. And from my part as well, thank you for your absolutely fascinating lecture. I'm going to share some of the questions in the chat along with Anne. So we have a question from Harag Papazian, who's a postdoc at the Promise Armenian Institute, who says it's now well known that Islamization was a structural component of the Armenian genocide. I wonder whether that phenomenon has occurred in Aintab as well. And if it has, what can you say about its economic dimension? For example, were remaining Islamized Armenians' properties also confiscated, or were they able to maintain their lands and houses thanks to conversion to Islam? And finally, Harag asks, are there descendants of Islamized Armenians in contemporary Gaziantep? And can you share any information about them as well?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful question. Thank you, Harag. Of course, during the deportation, it launched in Aintab on 1st August 1915, actually. Over the course of 4 deportation processes, which lasted till early 1917 in the city, around 35 families managed to stay in the town by getting converted to Islam. And these families, how I could reach this information, I reached that information out from an Armenian source, an Armenian monograph on the history of Aintab. So what happened to properties of these families? I don't know an exact and definitive information about this, but according to abandoned property laws, someone who, because these laws and regulations were subjected to or applied to only deported Ottoman citizens who were not going to be deported, or who were be exempt from deportations. These properties, abandoned property or liquidation laws, were not supposed to be applied to these people in question. So that was the regulation which, as a government, the CUP was supposed to stick to or abide by. But what happened on the ground in terms of converted Aintab Armenian families to Islam, I don't have any clear-cut information what happened to their properties. But in principle, on paper, their properties were not supposed to be liquidated or auctioned or expropriated. And in contemporary Gaziantep, Islamized Armenians who are living, like, say, under in covert. We have some public information, let's say. Okay, so we are aware of the presence of a few families living in Aintab, contemporary Gaziantep, and actually their family background traced back to, you know, their Armenian roots. But of course, these people are living in the city, let's say, in disguise. But actually, people, it's like a public knowledge, you know, people know these families. And also these families, I know a few of them, they are articulating their loyalty or allegiance to the society by practicing Islam more and more frequently than, you know, other Muslim people in the city, let's say.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Imge Orandli, who is actually currently reading your book. And by the way, some have asked, where can we purchase this book? You can purchase it in a variety of venues, including Nasser's bookstore, as well as Amazon and so forth. But here is the question. She is intrigued by your authoritarian voice, which communicates a sense of responsibility and urgency in what you write. Could you expand on the ethical aspirations of your book in particular, and how this fits within your general research?
Thank you for posing this, again, another remarkable question, I guess. It's, of course, we are trying to do some scholarly work in scientific manner, methodologically, but also it has some links and nexus with our personal story as well. That's why I start the whole presentation with my personal story, how I got into this, let's say, and transformed my own personality as well, and also too, because the first thing was that I was always struck and intrigued by the extent of the wealth of some families in this town, in the city, you know. And to me, it was like coming out of nowhere, you know, from not a certain particular historical reference. I was trying to explore, dig in, but it came to no fruition, you know, in terms of being able to find out how this source of capital emanated or stemmed from. So, and also another ethical aspiration was that I went to school with most of the great grandsons and daughters of these families, these elite families. And that also always raised certain questions in my mind about the economic transformation of the city. My first initial point was to be able to understand how the classes, in a very Marxist sense as well, how socioeconomic classes in this town were came into existence. When I hone into this particular subject matter, I encounter the presence of Armenians, their economic wealth, the extent of their economic wealth. I mean, I wasn't particularly aiming at working on the deportation or destruction or Armenian genocide, particularly, specifically. But the more I dug in, exploring and elucidating the economic transformation and capitalization of this city, how the first capital accumulation in this city came into being and so forth, that always pushed me towards the presence of Armenians in the town. And the whole things revealed themselves, unfolded, you know, instinctively and automatically. So that was my first intention and undertaking in my scholarly enterprise. Also, this Papyrus coffee shop. I used to go there frequently, but I had no information, no idea, nothing about the history of this building, and I was actually so annoyed with myself, with my ignorance, you know, and also indifference of people who know this history, you know, also evoke me and push me to work on this matter as well. But it started with my own ignorance, and then actually people, this like offshot of these elites, they know this history better than I do, you know, better than I did actually back then, because actually they know it. They know how this, I mean, how this place was owned by an Armenian person or an Armenian family and so forth. They know all this history, but I wasn't aware of that back then. So, and my ignorance and the indifference of these people, you know, were the main components and also prompts for me to work on this topic.
Thank you.
Ümit, I have a question from Mark Mamigonian, who asks, so he says that your work and others' work seems to finally move us beyond the simplistic dichotomy of it was a few radical CUP leaders who were responsible and it was local actors who had no connection to the leadership. Do you see this broader understanding of both elite and grassroots and everything in between mass participation in the genocide gaining traction among scholars of the Armenian genocide?
Mm-hmm. I think there is a growing, it's a great question, first and foremost, because it's coming from Mark Mamigonian, so it's quite normal for him to ask great questions. I'm used to it. So there is a growing tendency, not only in the field of genocide studies, but in the field of mass violence, largely speaking, there's the tendency to understand the seeds and the roots of genocidal violence or collective violence by focusing or looking at the localities, even the, you know, even the certain places within the same locality. So the micro of micro, let's say, studies now it's a growing tendency among scholars, because, you know, what we are talking about beyond aside from naming it as a genocide, what we are talking about is a mass violent event, mass violent incident, the destruction of a group of people or a society or a race or a nation entirely. So this kind of operation, it needs human power, labor, finance, recruitment. So you cannot carry that as a central authority, this kind of tremendous operation, ethnic and social demographic engineering and so forth, Turkification, conversion, all these government operations. These are the state nationalization policies during the war, actually. These policies would not have been able to carry that by the support and consent of different sections of society. So that's why my work is not only focusing on this micro level or micro level, but also this meso level, to explain the role of notables, mid-ranking officers, tribal leaders who actively participated in this destruction process. I think now the Armenian genocide, in the field of Armenian genocide studies, we are going to see much more work in this line as well. And I hope my book also will open an avenues in this line as well.
Thank you. So I have a question I'll pose kind of my own, actually, and then Kate will go to others in our list. But for Ümit, again, in terms of next steps in your own research, do you plan to do further research on Aintab, given the additional documentation that exists, such as what Bob showed to us from the other side of his family? Or would it be important, especially given the upcoming 100th anniversary of the founding of the modern Turkish Republic, to explore other regions of the former Ottoman Empire that enabled this fledgling republic and its citizens to suddenly acquire such extraordinary wealth. Which direction do you see as more important?
Wonderful. To me, I'm done with my work with Aintab, let's say, scholarly speaking, of course. I was born and raised here. I'm from here. I'm native, like Bob. But I think the research or directions should be should be focusing on what happened in other regions. So also in order to see the regional variation, because really extent, intensification, and also even the extent of explosion of mass violence, genocide as a mass violence, it really varied from region to region, location to location. Of course, as a whole, it was the total annihilation of people as citizens of this empire. But again, there were really variations. For instance, intensification and extent of violence was distinctly different from in Cilicia from the eastern provinces or Western Armenia. So that's why we need more regional work, more, understanding, albeit harrowingly, what happened in each and every district, town, or the province where Armenians used to live as inhabitants, the residents of these places. And I think we should focus more on non-violent aspects of this mass violent event, this collective violence event, this genocide. Because rather than proving that genocide happened, we need to go beyond that kind of standpoint. These kind of works have been quite valuable in the field as well. And I think we have gone beyond that. So we need to focus more on the conversion, family stories, or the pre-genocide history of Armenian families, Armenian culture, Armenian economy, and so forth. But in the case of explaining Armenian genocide, I think we need to more focus on how this process was carried out, for instance, by legal papers. You know, who were the perpetrators? Not only this infamously known central people or authorities, committee members like Dr. Nazım Bahattin Shakir, Şükrü Kayalı, or other notorious names, but we need more work on how ordinary civilian Muslims or provincial notables or local elites, for instance, in Kilis, another region in Cilicia, or in Rumkale or Brejik or Urfa, how these Armenian societies, Armenian people were destined to destruction in these provinces. I think we should conduct more research in this line.
Thank you.
Fascinating. So there are more questions piling up, and I know we're reaching nearly the end of the time, but I wanted to ask a quick question of my own and also bring in one from the audience. So, I mean, it strikes me, and this goes to Bob's presentation as well, that one of the obvious questions that arises from this detailed documentation is questions about restitution and reparations. I mean, to a certain extent, you are providing material for that. And I think, in fact, we could see your work as part of a general project of reparations, perhaps. That's necessarily your motivation, but in the wider sense, the memorialization, the attention paid to the details of these criminal acts against the Armenian people. But I wonder if you could talk a little about any efforts at restitution or reparations which you've come across in connection with your work. And I will just throw in one more question from Gonka Sonmez Pool, who's interested in how easy it was for you to get people to answer your questions. And if you could talk about whether documents or people were the easiest source. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So efforts for restitution, it's a very complicated issue, actually. First, I must underline one point. I talk about abandoned property laws by not getting into details of these whole legal structure. These laws and regulations were really, really very complicated, had all these cold language and discourse over the positive law and so forth. And these laws were arranged and revised over the course of years during the Republican period and modern Turkish Republican period as well. And these laws and regulations were valid until 1986, which means that properties, immovable properties especially, of Armenians who already passed away or, you know, or left any town, any city in Turkey at that time, kept on being appropriated and liquidated. So the state was so, I mean, foxly clever to keep the process under its control, you know. So that's why in domestic laws in Turkey, it's quite difficult to demand or claim for restitution, you know. And on the other hand, there are other hurdles. It was a tremendous hurdle for me, first and foremost, for instance, while doing my research, because I was not allowed or able to enter the archives of land registry. These archives are closed. So there are some ways for Armenian survivors, Armenian generations, who are living, I mean, or diaspora, let's say, to apply or open a lawsuit in Turkish domestic courts, follow the procedure. It's legal and legitimate, but usually the ramifications of these lawsuits, you know, are not positive. But the court has to take the case, at least, has to analyze the case, investigate the case, the judge himself. You should need a trustworthy lawyer in Turkey who you can give, he can be or she can be delegated to get into the title deeds archives and then see the trajectory of the properties in question, and can open a lawsuit in the Turkish court. But now in Turkey, political situation and climate is extremely bleak, and it's profoundly bad, and it's impossible for any lawyer to be courageous to take such a case. But there are domestic ways, you know, in Turkey, you can do that. Also, there are international ways to claim for restitution in the European Court of Human Rights. But again, European Court of Human Rights always, they take the cases and then send it back to the, usually consider them invalid, because the court's suggestion or overture is usually that you should first consume and exhaust the whole domestic, you know, steps, and then make your application for the European Court of Human Rights. So you should set your foot in Turkey in order to open a lawsuit, but there are hurdles which I have just pointed out. So it's a very complicated issue, but it needs a political will from Turkish side to initiate this process. Legally speaking, I think legal roads are really, really tight, you know, and there is this deadlock, and I don't see any high likelihood for Armenian diaspora to be able to get any kind of compensation or restitution or fulfilling of their restitution claims within the boundary of Turkish nation state, within the Turkish domestic courts.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have many excellent questions, but I'll ask just one last one, and this is a little bit more of a personal nature from Professor Alan Whitehorn. What about your own family, Ümit? Are they still present in Gaziantep? Have they and their friends, how have they reacted to your writing? If you'd like to share that with us. Has there been any personal backlash from the locals and so forth? Whatever you are comfortable sharing.
Yeah. I think your question is related to what Gonja has also asked as well, so I can answer both for both of you. Yes, my whole parents, family members, they all live and make their earnings in the city in Gaziantep. We are, relatively speaking, well-known family, let's say, in the town, at least in our district. My family members from my mother's side, father's side, they all live in Gaziantep. Actually, I usually get along with people, so I always do my best to not make them feel annoyed or upset. So I try to be a little bit diplomatic, tactful, let's say, in order to extract information from them. But backlash usually comes from local media outlets in the city, and local newspapers especially. They really harshly castigated my slander campaigns, smear campaigns, and so forth, especially in local newspapers and other media outlets, in digital media outlets. Of course, my parents, especially my father, is part of this local community, and he hears out all these news in the newspapers. He reads them, so that makes him feel quite uncomfortable and worried about my own, life, let's say. But these are actually I don't know, threats, but they don't fill in them, so it's empty threats, let's say. But usually in public, I'm fine, safe and sound. I had done my work in the local libraries, in the university libraries, and so forth. So I haven't encountered any kind of backlash, or physical or verbal, oral, whatever. But when my book on perpetrators has come out, and then this book has come out, for some of the members of these families, their grandchildren, they send me an emails threatening me, and also because I publish the history of the trajectory of how these properties would change hands. So it also, of course, touches upon them. So it was the first time I received these kind of, let's say, threatening kind of emails. But among, in the Aintab folk, I am coming along pretty well, let's say.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your candor and your wonderful talk.
Thank you so much.
I wish we could get to all of our questions, but there just isn't time right now. So let me just briefly conclude by once again offering our grateful thanks to Dr. Ümit Kurt and to Mr. Bob Kurkjian for a very stimulating lecture and discussion. This was really an excellent summary of your important scholarly work, Ümit, and we're grateful to you for this presentation, and especially for its important connection to those of us who are children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Armenian genocide survivors. And again, thank you especially to Bob for this fascinating new information that you've uncovered about your own family's connection to this important history. Also grateful thanks to my colleague, Kate McIntosh, for her participation in this important webinar, and to our Promise Armenian Institute Deputy Director, Hasmik Baghdasaryan, who has been very active in all aspects of this event behind the scenes. So now let me close by announcing a number of upcoming Zoom-based events that are hosted or co-hosted by the Promise Armenian Institute and the Promise Institute for Human Rights at UCLA. On Friday, October 15 and Saturday, October 16, on each day from 8 a.m. till 12 noon Pacific time, the Promise Armenian Institute is partnering with the Zorian Institute in presenting a 2-day conference on the subject of gender and intersectionality in post-Soviet Armenia, providing a platform to better understand gender-related issues in the present-day Republic of Armenia, and featuring a range of relevant panels and distinguished panel speakers. After this, the Promise Institute for Human Rights is hosting 2 upcoming events as part of their Human Rights Around the World series. On Wednesday, October 20 at 12:15 Pacific, panelists will discuss the conflict in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, with experts laying out the historical context for the fighting, the ongoing violence, the restricted access of humanitarian organizations, and the impact on people on the ground. And on Monday, October 25 at 5:30 p.m. Pacific, there will be a focus on the Uyghur population of Xinjiang, where panelists will discuss China's efforts to shift human rights discourse at the UN and the role of business in promoting human rights. And finally, on Thursday, November 18 at 9 a.m. Pacific, the Promise Armenian Institute, in partnership with the Armenian Film Foundation, will host Aftermath, the Armenian Earthquake of 1988, the first online exhibit of the Armenian Image Archive, which will celebrate the work of Asador Güzelian, a photographer based in London who went to Armenia shortly after the earthquake in 1918 to capture the devastating effects of that catastrophe. And this is, again, in partnership with the Armenian Film Foundation. And there are several other events in the works for coming months, so please be sure to visit our UCLA Promise Armenian Institute website and the website for the Promise Institute for Human Rights at UCLA Law, or visit us on social media to see more details. So again, thank you for your attendance at this lecture, and we look forward to having you participate in future events for the Promise Armenian Institute and the Promise Institute for Human Rights at UCLA. Thank you.